Pay the rent or get out. Those 5 words still ring in my ears like a slap that never fades. I can still see her, Syra, standing in the middle of my living room, her voice sharp enough to cut through bone. My son, Adil, sat silently at the dining table, pretending to scroll through his phone. My grandchildren froze, their wide eyes darting between us. For a moment I couldn't move. The woman I had once called daughter was now a stranger shouting at me in the home I had helped build. I had given up so much for this family. After my husband's death, I sold his small workshop to keep us afloat. The money went into this house, our house. I thought it would keep us together. Instead, it became the stage for my humiliation. Syra's tone was venom wrapped in sugar. Amma, things are expensive now. We can't carry everyone. You live here rent-free, it's only fair. Rent-free. The word lodged in my throat like a stone. My hands trembled, not from anger but disbelief. I wanted to shout back, to remind her that this house existed long before her fancy handbags and loud opinions, but the words wouldn't come. Adil said nothing. He always said nothing. He just rubbed his forehead and muttered, "Please, both of you, not in front of the kids." But silence sometimes is the worst betrayal of all. I turned to him, hoping for one look of defense, one flicker of shame. He kept his eyes down. I realized in that instant that my son had chosen peace, her peace, over my dignity. Later that evening, I sat in the small corner of the living room where my husband's photo still hung. The light from the lamp flickered against his face, the smile frozen forever in time. "You left me too soon," I whispered. "You'd never have let them talk to me like this." The house felt colder than it ever had before. Even the walls seemed to echo with her voice. "Pay the rent or get out. Pay the rent or get out." That night I made tea for one. The spoon clinked softly against the cup, each sound too loud in the quiet. Through the open window I could hear Syra laughing upstairs, a sharp, carefree laugh that made my chest tighten. My memories wandered to the early days, when she first married Adil. She used to call me Amaji, bring me sweets, sit by my side and listen to my stories. Back then, I believed love had entered my home again. But love doesn't always die loudly. Sometimes it rots slowly, beneath polite smiles and unspoken debts. I noticed how, over time, she took charge of everything. Bills, groceries, even Adil's decisions. I told myself it was modern life. Maybe I was too old-fashioned. Maybe this was what new families looked like. But no one prepares you for the day you become invisible in your own home. I tried to tell Adil that night. "She didn't mean it," he said weakly. "She's just stressed. The children, the expenses." "She said rent, Adil," I interrupted. "Rent. In the house your father and I built." He looked away. "I'll talk to her tomorrow." But he never did. I couldn't sleep. The clock ticked loudly, each second pulling me further into my thoughts. My husband's last words returned to me. "Keep the house safe, Huma. It's our legacy." I had promised him I would. And yet, here I was, being treated like a tenant in my own legacy. I rose quietly from bed, careful not to wake anyone. The moonlight spilled across the corridor, pale and cold. I walked to my old chest of drawers, the one my husband built himself. My fingers brushed the edges of the drawer, the same one where we used to keep our important papers. Inside, beneath yellowed cloth and forgotten trinkets, lay the property documents. I hadn't looked at them in years. My husband's neat signature still marked the pages beside mine, a silent witness to everything we'd worked for. My chest tightened. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept reading line by line. The house was still in our names. Not Adil's. Not Cyrus. I folded the papers carefully, pressing them against my chest. Upstairs, Cyrus' laughter drifted again, bright and careless. I realized something then. She believed she'd won. That she could shame me, silence me, make me small. But she'd forgotten one thing. I wasn't a guest here. I was the foundation. And if they wanted me gone, they'd soon learn what it meant to lose the ground beneath their feet. Cliffhanger. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I made a promise to myself. If they could treat me like a burden, I'd remind them whose name was on the papers. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Cyrus' voice echoing through the walls. Pay the rent or get out. It wasn't just the words anymore. It was the look in her eyes when she said them. Cold, certain, victorious. By morning, the air in the house felt different. Heavy. The kind of silence that doesn't bring peace, only pressure. I sat on the edge of my bed, watching sunlight crawl across the floor. The same light that once filled this room with warmth now felt distant, like it didn't belong here anymore. I looked at the wooden drawer near the window, the one my husband had built himself. He carved it from rosewood, humming softly as he worked. A house needs strong places for secrets, he had said, smiling. At the time, I thought he meant hiding sweets from the children. Now I understood. My fingers trembled as I pulled the drawer open. The scent of old paper and sandalwood rose like a memory. Inside were bits of my life. A prayer book, faded photographs, my husband's watch that no longer ticked. And beneath them, wrapped in a yellowing envelope, were the house documents. For a long time I just stared at them. The edges were frayed, the ink slightly faded, but our names were still clear. Huma and Rashid Khan. Not Adil. Not Syra. A soft ache filled my chest. My husband's handwriting stared back at me like a ghost. His signature strong and sure, even after all these years. I traced the letters with my fingertips, whispering, "You kept your promise, Rashid. You built something that still stands." But then my throat tightened. Because what good is a home that doesn't protect you anymore? I remembered when we laid the foundation of this house. The laughter, the arguments over colors, the smell of wet cement. We had saved every rupee to make this place our safe haven. When it was finally finished, Rashid had said, "Now we'll never have to bow to anyone." How bitterly ironic that I was now being told to pay rent in that same house. The papers in my hand felt heavy, not from their weight, but from what they represented. Promise. Betrayal. Voice. I sat there for hours, lost in the past. I saw Rashid smile. The day we brought newborn Adil home from the hospital. I saw Cyrus' shy face the first time she crossed our threshold as a bride. Her hands trembling as she touched my feet. And I saw what we had become. Strangers living under the same roof, pretending everything was fine. Amma. It was Adil's voice, faint through the door. Yes, I answered, forcing calm. Breakfast's ready. Syra made parathas. I'm not hungry, I said. He hesitated. You okay? I'm fine, I lied. Go ahead. His footsteps faded, and I was left alone again. Just me and the echo of everything we'd lost. I opened my husband's old prayer book. Between its pages, I found a note in his handwriting. Peace, Huma. Always keep peace. Even when it hurts. For years, I had obeyed that line like scripture. I swallowed my pain, forgave harsh words, smiled when I wanted to cry. All in the name of peace. But now I understood something I hadn't before. Peace is not silence. Peace is not endurance. Sometimes peace must be taken back. A storm built quietly inside me. I folded the documents neatly, placed them back in their envelope, and held them to my chest. From the kitchen I could hear laughter. Cyrus' voice again, loud and carefree. Adil, tell your mother she can't just skip meals. She needs to contribute somehow. Her words were knives disguised as concern. I stood up, feeling something shift inside me, the kind of strength that grows only after years of being overlooked. As I walked to the mirror, I caught sight of my own reflection. The woman staring back at me looked older, yes, but also sharper. Her eyes weren't filled with tears anymore. They burned with quiet resolve. I smoothed my hair, tied my dupatta, and slipped the envelope into my purse. The decision had already been made. I just hadn't admitted it until now. I went to my husband's photograph one last time. The morning light touched his face through the glass. I tried, Rashid, I whispered. I kept peace. But now, it's time to keep myself. The words left my mouth like a vow. Downstairs, the house was alive with morning sounds. Dishes clinking, a cartoon blaring from the TV, Syra humming to herself. None of them noticed me standing at the doorway. I looked around, at the cracked paint on the walls, the old clock, the table where so many meals were shared and so many silences grew heavy. Every inch of it carried a memory, and yet it no longer felt like mine. I tightened my grip on the handbag. Then I did what I hadn't done in years. I stepped outside alone, without asking anyone's permission. The morning sun hit my face, and for a fleeting second I felt weightless. No one called after me. No one asked where I was going. And maybe that was the answer I'd been waiting for. Cliffhanger. The next morning I placed the documents in my handbag, and left the house without saying goodbye. I felt my heart hammer the moment I stepped into the registry office. The sterile smell of paper, ink, and polish filled my lungs, making me feel both out of place and strangely alive. I had never imagined I'd return here. Not after all these years, not after everything that had happened. But today I had no choice. The office was quiet, almost deserted. Rows of desks, stacks of folders, and the soft hum of a ceiling fan created a rhythm that reminded me of the past. Of when Rashid would joke about the endless bureaucracy of paperwork, how we both laughed at the absurdity of life's rules. I moved toward the counter, scanning the room for a familiar face. And then I saw him. Farouk? Asked tentatively. The older man looked up from a pile of documents. His eyes widened slightly, recognition flashing like sunlight on glass. Huma. By God, it's been years. I felt a mix of relief and guilt. I need your help. Quietly. He studied me, his brow furrowing. Of course. Come with me. We walked to a small side office, away from the chatter of clerks and the rustle of files. Farouk shut the door gently behind us, and the familiar scent of aged paper and polished wood made my chest tighten. I'm in a difficult position, I began. I need to understand the legal status of the house. The one Rashid and I built together. Farouk leaned back in his chair, regarding me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Huma, you know I would never lie to you. You are the rightful co-owner. The papers, they're still in your name and Rashid's. No one else has the legal authority to sell. Relief washed over me in waves, but it was tangled with guilt. Guilt for considering selling. Guilt for even thinking of stepping out from the shadows into a world that had tried to erase me. I bit my lip. Even if my son and his wife think otherwise. Farouk's voice was steady. Legally, their opinions don't matter. You hold the authority, the power. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my shaking hands. The truth felt like both a knife and a bomb. Could do this. I could reclaim what was mine. And yet, the thought of going behind my family's back left a sour taste in my mouth. I hadn't imagined strength like this sitting in my chest. It was raw, unrefined, but it was mine. They'll never forgive me, I whispered. They might not, Farouk said softly, leaning forward. But this is your life, Huma. You're right. You must do what you feel is necessary to protect yourself. I nodded, swallowing back tears I hadn't expected. I don't want anyone to know I'm here. Not Adil, not Syra. No one. Farouk smiled faintly. Consider it done. Discretion is my specialty. He rifled through a stack of files on his desk, then pulled out a small envelope. There's someone I can recommend, he said, sliding it across the table. Rahim. He's discreet, trustworthy, and professional. Will handle everything without questions. I wouldn't send anyone else. I picked up the card, my fingers trembling despite my attempt to appear composed. My chest felt tight, my mind buzzing with possibilities I had never dared to imagine before. The office around us seemed to blur. The hum of the fan, the ticking of a wall clock, the faint shuffle of papers outside the door. All of it faded as I stared at the business card. A stranger, yet someone who could help me take control. The liberation that washed over me was shocking. I could feel the weight of years of humiliation lift, replaced by a dangerous, thrilling power. And yet, alongside it, guilt clung stubbornly. Guilt for deceiving my own children, guilt for embracing something so selfish. Farouk studied me again, his dark eyes sharp but kind. "Are you sure about this, Huma?" I nodded, my throat tight with determination. "I am. It's the only way." He smiled faintly. "Then you'll have an ally. Just promise me no rushing. Think through every step." I took a deep breath, letting the reality sink in. I was no longer powerless. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like the woman I used to be. Decisive, in control, untouchable in a way that felt both liberating and terrifying. And yet, my hands continued to shake as I held the small piece of paper. Cliffhanger. Farouk slid a business card across the desk. A buyer's agent, discreet and trustworthy. My hands trembled as I took it. I felt my stomach twist as I walked into the cafe, clutching the envelope with Farouk's card. A stranger was about to handle the one thing I had loved, protected, and yet had been forced to fight for silently. Rahim was already there, seated by the window. He looked up as I approached, offering a polite nod. There was no arrogance in his eyes, no judgment. Just calm, patient attention, a rarity I hadn't experienced in months. "Mrs. Khan?" he asked, standing slightly, extending a hand. "Yes," I whispered, almost afraid to breathe too loudly. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Please have a seat. Tea." I nodded, barely noticing as he ordered for both of us. The smell of brewed leaves filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of rain outside. The cafe was quiet, the kind of quiet that allowed secrets to be spoken without fear. "I hear you want to sell your house," Rahim began gently, leaning back. "Tell me why now." I swallowed, forcing a weak smile. "Health reasons. I can't manage the property alone anymore." He didn't press, but I felt his gaze. Sharp, perceptive. He knew. He always knew. I sipped my tea, feeling it burn down my throat. "It's complicated," I said finally. "I just want to make sure everything is handled properly. Legally, safely." Rahim nodded slowly, as though he understood the layers I wasn't voicing. "I will take care of it," he said softly. Discreetly. "Your wishes, your terms." The words wrapped around me like a shield. For the first time in months I felt seen. Truly seen. We moved on to details. Price, paperwork, scheduling. I discovered, with a mix of shock and satisfaction, just how little Adil and Syra knew about the house's true value. They assumed it was just another family asset. Nothing more. I fought the urge to smirk. For months, I had been treated as if I were expendable, invisible. And now, quietly, I was the one holding all the cards. Rahim explained the process step by step, speaking clearly but patiently, making sure I understood every implication. I felt a surge of gratitude toward him. This stranger, this calm presence, was helping me regain control of my life. I found myself relaxing, almost laughing at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, sitting in a corner cafe, plotting my liberation with the help of someone I barely knew, while my own family remained blissfully unaware. At one point I glanced around. The sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the edges of Rahim's papers. People walked past outside, unaware that a small act of quiet rebellion was taking place inside. I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Agency. Freedom. "I assume you've dealt with tricky situations before?" I asked casually, trying to sound composed. Rahim smiled faintly. "Every client has a story. Every property has a history. But I've never met someone quite like you, Mrs. Khan. You're determined." The compliment warmed me, though guilt pricked at the edges of it. Determined. I wondered if he knew why I had to be. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Are you sure about this decision? About selling?" I paused, my hands clutching the envelope under the table. My mind raced through months of humiliation, disrespect, and quiet suffering. "I am," I said firmly. "It's the only way to regain peace." Rahim nodded again, understanding more than I had expected him to. Once you sign, there's no going back, he said softly. I felt a shiver of anticipation and relief. A smile crept onto my face. That's the point, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the soft clink of teaspoons and distant chatter. We discussed the final logistics. I realized I could control the timing, the communication, even the way my family would discover the truth. The house they had treated as their own playground for arrogance and entitlement was about to slip quietly from their grasp, and I would remain the unseen hand guiding the change. The thought filled me with a strange mixture of guilt and exhilaration. I remembered the mornings I had watched Syra flit about the house, laughing at my supposed old-fashioned ways. They had underestimated me. They always had. Raheem's calm, steady presence grounded me. For the first time, I allowed myself to plan without fear. I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond the walls where I had been humiliated, where I could finally breathe without apologies, without invisible chains. The rain began softly outside, tapping against the glass. Its rhythm mirrored my heartbeat, quick, tense, yet oddly comforting. I looked at Raheem one last time, the business card pressed against my fingers like a talisman. I realized that this quiet stranger was about to help me reclaim something far bigger than property. My dignity, my sense of self, my freedom. And yet, a tiny, anxious part of me whispered that nothing could be reversed once set in motion. Cliffhanger, Raheem said softly. Once you sign, there's no going back. I smiled. That's the point. The day of the signing arrived, and I felt my pulse in my throat like a warning bell. Every step toward the office, every sound of my heels on the floor, echoed like a drumbeat of finality. I had rehearsed my calm, but inside, a storm raged. Excitement, fear, guilt, and a strange, bitter satisfaction all tangled together. Raheem was waiting as always. His presence was steady, comforting in a way that belied the enormity of what I was about to do. The room was small, sterile, with papers stacked neatly on the desk, pens glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Are you ready, Mrs. Khan?" he asked quietly. I nodded, swallowing back the lump in my throat. Yes. The documents were laid out before me. Each page felt heavier than the last. Names, figures, signatures. Everything that represented decades of effort, love, and dreams now demanded my hand to seal the future. I picked up the pen, my fingers trembling. The ink scratched across the paper, each stroke a mixture of revenge and sorrow. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept going. Each signature reminded me of Cyrus' cruel words, "Pay the rent or get out." Each one whispered back to me, a quiet retaliation written in my own hand. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, a building of memories and laughter now slipping away, and yet, I felt a strange, liberating lightness. Raheem watched silently, giving me the space I needed. I didn't need reassurance, only privacy. The walls held no judgment, only the faint hum of air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of papers in the office. I signed the last page, my hand shaky but determined. The pen clicked, echoing like a soft gunshot in the quiet room. "Done," Raheem said softly, his eyes warm. "It's official." I nodded, swallowing the lump of emotion that rose in my throat. The documents were mine. The sale was mine. The power was mine. And yet the room felt hollow. I realized that with every ounce of control I had gained, a part of me felt lonely. The act of reclaiming my life had come at the cost of a home I had loved, a family I had protected, and memories that could never be sold. The payment transfer notification lit up my phone. My hands shook as I stared at the number. More money than I had ever seen, more than I had dreamed. The reality hit me in waves, a mixture of awe, relief, and disbelief. I was free. I was powerful. And I was utterly alone. I looked around the office once more, taking in the sterile light, the neat stacks of paper, the quiet hum of the clock. Every detail was sharp, precise, unlike the messy, emotional chaos swirling in my chest. "Raheem," I whispered, almost afraid to speak. "Yes," he asked, still patient, still steady. "Thank you. For everything." He nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "You knew what you had to do. I just helped make sure it was possible. I left the office carefully, almost reverently, as if stepping out would make the moment vanish. Outside, the city was alive with sounds. Honking cars, vendors calling out, pedestrians rushing past. The world continued without pause, unaware of the quiet revolution I had just set in motion. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of my handbag against my side, carrying both papers and purpose. Each step was measured, deliberate. Each step reminded me that my life, finally, was in my own hands. The sun was starting to dip behind the buildings, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The light caught my hair, casting a soft halo around me. I felt a strange mix of triumph and emptiness, the kind you feel when you've fought hard, won, and realized the battlefield is now silent. I remembered Cyrus' voice again, sharp and demanding, and I allowed myself a small, private smile. She had underestimated me, just as she always had. By the time I reached home, the shadows had grown long across the courtyard. I paused at the door, taking a deep breath, preparing for the ordinary world that had no idea of the quiet storm I had stirred. When I stepped inside, the familiar smells of food and home greeted me, but nothing felt ordinary. My hands were still slightly trembling from the signature, from the knowledge of what I had done, from the power that was now mine. And then I saw her. Syra looked up from her phone, her tone sharp and impatient. "You're late again, Amma. Where were you?" I froze for a heartbeat, letting the words sink in. The arrogance, the entitlement, the obliviousness to what had transpired. It was almost laughable. I smiled softly, quietly, almost to myself. No words were necessary. The smile alone carried a promise, a warning, and a thrill that surged through me. Cliffhanger. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious, but I only smiled, letting her think she knew nothing. The house may have belonged to them in their minds, but the truth was mine, and they had no idea. 3 days. That was all Rahim had said. 3 days until the new owner would take possession. I felt a rush of adrenaline and dread swirl in my chest, a storm of satisfaction and panic. The house, the same walls that had held laughter, arguments, and decades of life, was about to change hands quietly, without anyone suspecting a thing. I moved through the rooms carefully, packing my belongings with silent precision. Each item I touched carried memories. My husband's watch, old photo albums, the embroidered tablecloth he had loved. I held them close, placing them gently into boxes, almost reverently. I kept glancing at the clock, aware of every creak of the floorboards. I didn't want anyone to notice. Not Adil, not Syra. Not anyone. Adil was oblivious, as always. He was buried in his laptop, clicking away at work, barely acknowledging my presence. I watched him, a twinge of sadness mixing with my resolve. My son, who once had been my pride, now existed in a world where his attention was so easily stolen by emails and calls. I wanted to call out to tell him what was coming, but I didn't. This was not for him. Not yet. Syra, meanwhile, was preparing yet another gathering, as if the house were entirely hers. I overheard snippets while carrying boxes, her voice bubbly, commanding, unaware. "We'll have everyone over this weekend. Decorations, new furniture. It's going to be perfect." I felt my lips twitch. The sheer confidence, the entitlement. It was almost comical if it weren't so infuriating. Packing felt like a ritual of both release and preservation. I lingered on the familiar spaces. The kitchen counter where I had chopped vegetables for decades, the living room rug that had absorbed laughter and tears alike. Each item I boxed was a memory I was saving from oblivion, even as the house itself slipped away from my family's grasp. The air was heavy with quiet tension. Outside, the sun cast long shadows across the walls, painting everything in gold and amber. I felt like a ghost moving through my own history, carrying the past into a future I was reclaiming for myself. Rahim had warned me about the emotional toll. "People underestimate what it feels like to hand over a lifetime," he said. "You'll be strong, but don't ignore the ache." I understood exactly what he meant now. Strength and sorrow can coexist. They do, in fact, feed off each other. Every careful movement, every box stacked, every whispered recollection of the life I had built felt like a quiet act of defiance. I found myself pausing at each photograph, each trinket. Family dinner here, a birthday party there. Adil as a toddler, Cyrus' shy smile when she first arrived. Everything I touched reminded me of the bonds, the betrayals, the years of endurance. The irony was cruel. These memories, so precious to me, meant little to the people who had mocked my presence in their own home. The house was almost ready for its new occupant. The familiar hum of appliances, the smell of polished wood, the fading light across the walls. All of it would soon belong to someone who had no connection to decades of life, love, and silent suffering. A strange thrill ran through me, paired with guilt. Was this really right? Could I feel satisfaction without shame? Rahim had assured me it was necessary. The law and my own dignity allowed it. But the heart, stubborn, unpredictable, questioned every choice. That evening, as I carried the last of my small keepsakes to the car, I overheard Cyrus speaking in the kitchen, voice brimming with excitement. Once the house is fully in our name, we'll renovate everything. New furniture, fresh paint. It'll finally be our place. I almost laughed, the sound caught in my throat. The obliviousness, the entitlement, they had no idea. Every word was a proof of the quiet victory I was orchestrating. I leaned against the doorway for a moment, inhaling the familiar sense of home one last time. The sunlight streaming through the windows painted a glow across the floorboards. It was beautiful, tragic, and exhilarating all at once. I realized then that I wasn't just leaving behind walls or rooms. I was leaving behind expectations, insults, and years of being overlooked. And in their place, I was carving out freedom, my own. I closed my eyes, imagining the new owner stepping through the door, seeing the house as it was, untouched by arrogance or disrespect. I imagined Cyrus' future shock, Adil's confusion, their realization that this house, the one they had taken for granted, was never truly theirs. And in that moment, I felt the first flicker of peace in months, mixed with a sharp tang of triumph. The boxes were loaded, the car waiting, the house almost empty. I looked around one last time, feeling the weight of what I had done. It wasn't just about property. It was about reclaiming my place, my dignity, my power, quietly, deliberately. And as I stepped back into the car, my gaze lingered on the windows where Syra moved about, blissfully unaware. Cliffhanger. That evening I overheard Syra say, "Once the house is fully in our name, we'll renovate everything." I almost laughed, they had no idea. The knock on the door came sharply, slicing through the quiet afternoon. I opened it to see a courier holding a thick, official-looking envelope. My heart beat faster. The weight of the past weeks had been building toward this moment. "Delivery for the residents of this property," he said, handing it over. I took it calmly, hiding the flutter of anticipation in my chest. Inside was the letter I had orchestrated, the legal confirmation that would change everything, the notice that the house had been sold and a date had been set to vacate. I placed the envelope on the dining table and stepped back, letting the silence stretch. A few minutes later, Syra came in, her presence brash and loud as always. "What is this?" she demanded, snatching the letter off the table. Her eyes scanned the words, widening in shock. "Eviction notice," she shrieked, her voice cutting through the house like glass. "This is impossible. Adil, why didn't you tell me?" Adil, who had been casually scrolling on his phone, looked up, confusion and panic crossing his features. "What?" "Syra, calm down. What is this?" I stayed seated, my hands folded in my lap, voice quiet but steady. "Perhaps you should read the fine print," I said gently, my eyes on the envelope. Cyrus' face twisted with disbelief. "Fine print? You can't do this. This house, it's ours. We live here." I nodded slowly, every word deliberate, carrying the weight of years of betrayal and endurance. "You live here. But you were tenants, not owners." Adil's head snapped up, the color draining from his face. "Mom, what have you done?" His voice wavered, disbelief and hurt blending into one. I met his eyes steadily. I've done what was necessary. The house is legally mine to sell. You were allowed to live here, yes, but that doesn't mean it ever belonged to you. His hands trembled as he reached for the letter, scanning it frantically. Syra paced, tugging at her hair, screaming accusations that bounced off the walls. How could you betray us like this? She shouted. We trusted you. I stayed quiet, letting the room fill with chaos. My heart ached in ways that no money, no power could heal. This was my family, my son and my daughter-in-law, and I had just turned their world upside down. But the pain was tempered with clarity. For too long I had been treated like a guest, an intruder, a burden. For too long I had swallowed my pride, endured humiliation, and remained silent. Now finally the law and the truth were on my side. Adil's voice softened, trembling. Mom, we thought we knew everything. We thought this was ours. I felt a pang of sorrow for him. My son, caught between loyalty to his wife and the sudden shock of reality. I wanted to reach out to comfort him, but I knew words could not undo the consequences. You were tenants, I said again, my voice low but firm. This is not personal. It is simply the truth. Syra's face contorted with rage and disbelief. Truth. You could have told us. We could have worked something out. I shook my head gently, almost sadly. Perhaps. But silence sometimes speaks louder than words. The room was thick with tension. Sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the dust motes floating lazily in the air. The familiar warmth of the house felt cold and alien now, a place where trust and assumption had been replaced with stark reality. I watched Adil pace, running his hands through his hair, muttering to himself. My heart broke for him. Not for the house, not for the money, but for the shock, the sudden rupture of a world he had believed unshakable. I don't understand, he whispered finally, looking at me. His voice was raw, shaky, a mixture of fear and helplessness. You will, I said softly, but I could see that the truth stung more than I anticipated. There was no gentleness here, only the hard facts of legal ownership. Syra collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Her sobs echoed through the walls, a sound that twisted my chest. Part of me felt guilty for orchestrating this upheaval, but part of me, the part that had endured humiliation and disrespect for far too long, felt vindicated. Adil came to stand in front of me, shoulders slumped, eyes red and glistening. Where will we go now? He whispered, voice breaking. I turned away, unable to meet his gaze. My throat tightened, and for the first time I did not have an answer. The house was quiet again, save for Syra's quiet sobbing and the distant hum of the city outside. The room seemed smaller, emptier, almost claustrophobic. Every familiar corner, every cherished memory now held the bitter tang of inevitability. I realized that victory, while sweet, came with a cost I hadn't fully imagined. Even as I had gained control, I had fractured the family in ways that could not be mended overnight. The legal letters, the signatures, the money, all of it could not fill the hollow ache in my chest as I faced the tears of my own child. I moved to the window, letting my hands rest on the sill. Sunlight struck my face, but it did nothing to warm the sorrow pooling in my chest. I had acted to protect myself, to reclaim dignity, to take control of my life. But the house, and the family that had taken it for granted, would never feel the same again. I whispered to the empty room, almost to myself. This was necessary. It had to be done. Cliffhanger. Adil's eyes filled with tears as he whispered, Where will we go now? I turned away. I didn't have the answer. The house felt different that night, quieter, heavier. Boxes were stacked in corners, filled with belongings that had once seemed permanent, now destined for elsewhere. Every creak of the floorboard sounded louder, sharper, like the house itself was aware of the impending emptiness. The family moved in silence. Syra barked occasional instructions about what to pack and wear, but her words lacked warmth. Adil hovered behind her, shuffling items mechanically, eyes downcast, lost in the enormity of the change. I watched them from the hallway, a pang of something undefinable twisting in my chest. Satisfaction, yes. Triumph, absolutely. But beneath it all, a hollowness I hadn't expected settled in. I wandered from room to room, letting my fingers trail over the walls I had painted decades ago. Each stroke of color, each corner carefully curated, whispered memories of a life I had built, laughter and tears, arguments and reconciliations, milestones and mundane moments. I paused in the living room, picturing my wedding day. The sunlight had streamed through these very windows, catching my husband's eyes as he laughed, pure and joyous. I could almost hear his voice echoing off the walls, calling my name with tenderness and love. In the kitchen, I recalled the small disasters and triumphs of raising Adil. His first steps, scraped knees, birthday cakes that never turned out right, every memory vivid against the backdrop of the house. The scent of the old cabinets, the worn counter, even the dented kettle held echoes of decades I had poured into this home. Syra passed me in the hallway, her glare sharp and accusing, though she said nothing. I met her eyes for a moment, and in that silence I felt the shift in power. She was unaware, clueless, as if the weight of truth had not yet settled upon her shoulders. I allowed myself a small, private smile. Victory was mine, but it felt strange without the confrontation, without the acknowledgement of my son or her. Hollow, yes, but complete in its own quiet way. Boxes lined the hallways now, labeling the life that had once been ours. I lifted a framed photograph of Adil as a child, smiling with innocence, unaware of the burdens of adulthood. I traced the edges with my fingers, a bittersweet ache settling deep in my chest. The house smelled of polished wood and dust, a scent so familiar that it made my throat tighten. I breathed it in deeply, committing it to memory, knowing I would never experience it the same way again. Syra's movements were brisk, almost frantic, as if she could erase the reality of leaving by sheer speed. Adil's silence weighed heavier than her anger. He had stopped speaking, stopped arguing, lost in the tension that hung thick in the air. I felt a pang of regret, a whisper of maternal instinct tugging at me. But for the first time in years I didn't respond. I didn't offer comfort, didn't explain, didn't shield. This night was not theirs to soften. It belonged to the truth, and the consequences they had ignored for too long. I lingered in the master bedroom, touching the headboard where my husband had rested, the side table where we kept our trinkets, the curtains that had framed years of morning light. I imagined the countless quiet mornings we had shared here, the whispered plans, the simple contentment of being together. I felt tears prick my eyes but did not let them fall. This was not grief for the house itself, but a recognition of what it represented: love, history, and endurance that could not be quantified or returned. Descending the staircase, I watched Syra sorting the last of her items. She glanced at me briefly, suspicion and frustration in her eyes, but said nothing. I allowed the silence to stretch, the tension between us unspoken yet palpable. Adil hovered behind her, his hands empty, shoulders slumped. The weight of reality had begun to settle, and though he tried to mask it, the tension between mother, son, and daughter-in-law filled the house like a dense fog. I moved toward the living room one last time, touching the spines of books on the shelf, the frames on the walls, the furniture we had chosen together. Memories rose in waves: laughter, arguments, milestones, quiet nights of reflection. This house had been the vessel of our family, a container of every joy and sorrow. And now it was no longer ours. I walked through the hallways again, making mental notes of everything I wanted to remember. The squeak of the floorboards near the stairs, the sunlight falling across the living room rug in the evening, the faint smell of my husband's cologne lingering near the bedroom. For all my triumph, all my control, a hollow emptiness lingered in my chest. The house was mine no longer, and yet it held every memory I carried, untouched, silent, and waiting for a new life. Cliffhanger. At midnight, I found Adil crying in the kitchen, and for the first time in years I didn't comfort him. The morning air was sharp, tinged with salt and the faint scent of rain. I held the house keys in my hand, feeling their weight as if they carried the memories of decades. Each groove and dent was a mark of history, of laughter, arguments, celebrations, and heartbreak. Today they would pass into someone else's hands, and I would finally be free. Rahim met me outside the house, calm and composed as ever. The sunlight glinted off his watch as he extended his hand, the pen and documents waiting neatly on a small folding table. "Are you ready, Mrs. Khan?" he asked gently. I nodded, my chest tight with anticipation. "Yes," I said softly, my voice almost swallowed by the breeze. I handed him the keys first, letting the metal clink softly against the table. It felt like letting go of a lifetime in a heartbeat. Every memory, every echo of my husband's laughter, every argument, every child's misstep, all tied to these keys, and all now slipping quietly away. Rahim collected the keys and documents with practiced hands, unaware of the storm of emotions churning behind my calm exterior. The buyer arrived shortly after, a young couple, bright-eyed and unaware. They shook my hand, thanking me with polite smiles, their excitement filling the air. "This is perfect," the woman said, glancing around. "We'll take care of it, I promise." I smiled, small and controlled, hiding the layers beneath. The history, the triumph, the resentment, the sorrow. They had no idea of the battles waged in these walls, no inkling of the quiet revenge that had led to this moment. Signing the final papers felt surreal. My hand shook slightly as I traced my name, each stroke a punctuation mark on years of endurance and injustice. The ink felt heavier than usual, each signature a blend of victory and heartbreak. I looked up once, meeting Rahim's eyes. He offered a faint, understanding nod. No words were needed. He knew the weight of what had just transpired. The house was officially handed over. I stepped back, letting the new owners take their first look around, letting them breathe life into walls that had held my family for decades. I lingered a moment at the threshold, tracing the familiar outline of the doorway with my fingers. My hand felt the cool metal of the frame, the faint texture of chipped paint where years had worn it thin. This doorway had been a portal of countless memories, and now it would witness new ones, entirely oblivious to the past. With the house behind me, I felt the first flicker of true freedom. Rahim handed me the check, discreet, quiet, as though acknowledging the storm I had left behind. The number made my breath catch. More than enough to start anew, more than enough to reclaim myself. But money, I realized, could never buy back the past. A week later, I found myself in a small seaside apartment I had purchased with my share. It was modest, peaceful, and most importantly mine. Whitewashed walls reflected the morning light, and the scent of the sea drifted through open windows. I stood on the balcony, watching the waves crash rhythmically against the shore. The ocean stretched endlessly, a reminder of life's vastness, of freedom, of distance from the storm I had left behind. Boxes still lined the apartment, unpacked, but I didn't mind. For once, I could move at my own pace, savor the quiet, feel the calm seep into my bones. This place was not a fortress, not a battlefield. It was a sanctuary, a small but sacred space where I could breathe without fear of judgment or insult. I sipped tea, watching the sunlight scatter across the water, glittering like scattered diamonds. The sea seemed endless, eternal, and I wondered if revenge, however quietly accomplished, ever truly healed the wounds it left behind. Memories of the house, of Cyrus' arrogance, of Adil's tears, of every sharp word and silent moment, floated across my mind. I'd won, yes, but peace. That was something I would have to discover for myself, day by day. Evening came, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. I lit a single candle on the balcony, watching the flames dance, feeling the warmth against my skin. The world was quiet now, unbroken by demands or expectations. I felt the hum of solitude, comforting, restorative, and at times achingly lonely. I allowed myself a small smile, the kind that comes from realizing you have finally claimed something purely your own. A life untethered, a space unclaimed by arrogance or entitlement. Then my phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting a routine message, maybe a reminder from Rahim. Instead, the screen lit up with Adil's name. My heart skipped a beat. "Amma," the message read. "Can we visit you?" I stared at it, fingers trembling slightly. Years of tension, heartbreak, and silent battles had led to this moment. And now, a tentative olive branch, a chance for connection, appeared on the small screen in my hand. I looked out at the ocean again, waves crashing, relentless and soothing at the same time. The thought of seeing my son, of bridging the distance I had created, brought both hope and hesitation. Could we find peace after everything? Could they understand the reasons, the quiet justice, the heartbreak that had accompanied it all? I didn't answer immediately. I let the sound of the sea fill the silence, washing over me like a balm, preparing me for what might come next. Cliffhanger. Then my phone buzzed, a message from Adil. "Alma, can we visit you?" My heart skipped a beat. "You said." The knock came softly, tentative, almost afraid to break the morning calm. Paused, listening. It wasn't the usual pounding, the brash announcement of someone entering my space. No, this was careful, hesitant, as though whoever stood outside feared the consequences of their own courage. I opened the door to see Adil and the grandchildren, their faces wary, unsure. The children clutched each other's hands, glancing up at me with eyes that mirrored both guilt and longing. Adil's shoulders were slumped, a mixture of shame and hope written across his features. Syra lingered behind them, just outside the doorway, her expression unreadable. She hesitated, biting her lip, clearly wrestling with the courage to cross the threshold. I felt a rush of memories hit me. The laughter of these little feet, the cries of scraped knees, the innocent joy of birthday candles and bedtime stories. All of it, now mingled with the sharp ache of betrayal, of broken trust, and the years of tension that had stacked between us. And yet, despite everything, I felt the first flicker of warmth in months. "Come in," I said softly, stepping aside. The children hesitated for a heartbeat, then scampered inside, each careful movement an unspoken apology. I knelt, opening my arms, and they ran into them. Their tiny hands clutched mine, and I could feel the pulse of life, the lingering bond that no argument or legal paper could sever. Adil stepped in next, taking a hesitant breath. "Alma." His voice was quiet, almost reverent. We wanted to see you." "I'm sorry, all of us." I studied him carefully. The guilt in his eyes was real, but so was the vulnerability, the realization that the house, once taken for granted, had slipped from their grasp. "I don't hate you," I said slowly, deliberately, "but I will never go back there. That house, it's closed to us." He nodded, swallowing hard, understanding the finality in my tone. His lips trembled as he fought the words he couldn't yet say. I moved toward the kitchen, inviting them to sit. Tea, simple and fragrant, steamed gently in the cups. The aroma filled the room, a small comfort, a quiet ritual that signaled safety and welcome. The children chattered softly, hesitant at first, then finding their rhythm, their voices carrying through the apartment in gentle waves. I smiled at them, brushing imaginary dust from their shoulders, allowing the small moments of joy to fill the space between us. Syra remained outside for a long while. I sensed her struggle, pride warring with guilt, fear clashing with remorse. Finally she stepped forward, tentative, eyes glistening. I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. The words trembled on her lips, fragile as porcelain. I watched her carefully, seeing the shame and regret etched into her expression. There was no theatrics, no excuse, only truth and raw vulnerability. I gestured for her to enter. She did, slowly, cautiously, as if stepping into forbidden territory. The air between us was thick with years of tension, unspoken grievances, and quiet hurt. "I forgive you," I said quietly, letting the words settle gently into the room. My voice was soft, but my eyes were sharp, holding the weight of all the pain she had caused. "But forgiveness is not forgetting. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. I didn't move to wipe them away. She needed to carry the weight of her own remorse, to feel the consequences of the past fully. The children watched us, sensing the gravity of the moment. They clung to me, their small hands a bridge between past mistakes and present connection. Adil's hand brushed mine briefly, a quiet gesture of reconciliation. We sat together, sharing tea, the aroma and warmth acting as a balm for the fractured edges of our family. Words were sparse, but presence, this shared fragile presence, spoke volumes. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. Not the triumphant, vindictive thrill of having reclaimed the house. Not the cold satisfaction of seeing justice served. But a quieter, deeper peace, knowing that relationships could survive imperfectly beyond walls and ownership. The apartment, the sea, the light streaming through the windows, they all reminded me that life moves forward, even when some doors close forever. After a long while, Syra whispered again. I will try to be better. I nodded, a faint smile crossing my face. I believed her words, not because they erased the past, but because they acknowledged it. That acknowledgement, fragile as it was enough. As the afternoon waned, the children grew restless. Adil rose to gather them, glancing at me with a tentative hope that lingered in his gaze. I didn't speak. I only watched, allowing them space to leave on their own terms. Syra lingered, hesitating. I waited, letting the silence stretch, allowing the unspoken truth between us to settle. Finally they turned to leave, the sound of footsteps soft against the floor. I walked them to the door, my hands brushing theirs, lingering just slightly longer than necessary. Outside, the sunlight reflected off the waves in the distance. I closed the door behind them, hearing the faint click of the lock. The key felt heavy in my hand, heavier than any of the battles or victories it had witnessed. I turned toward the sea, the vastness stretching endlessly before me. The smell of salt, the sound of waves crashing rhythmically against the shore, filled the air, soothing the ache of memory and triumph alike. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "This time the house chose me." It wasn't the old walls that held my history anymore, nor the echoes of betrayal or entitlement. It was the quiet peace of being somewhere I belonged, somewhere I had claimed for myself, and somewhere I could finally breathe. The past lingered, yes. The memories, the mistakes, the heartbreak, they were all there. But here, in this small apartment by the sea, I could exist beyond them. And for the first time in a long while I felt whole. Endings sting. As they left, I locked the door, turned toward the sea and whispered, "This time the house chose me." "You said,"